he had so much control over you to a point that you would go there by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his kids know nothing about it.
Well, I mean, it's not a funny story, but when I finally got help and the police got involved, when I pressed charges, 17 other women between the ages of 13 and 25 came forward and said me too.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode on Coffee with Kuda. I am excited to have Jason for the second time. Jason, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Pleasure to have you here. And before we go too far, I have a very important question that is being asked by the majority of people on TikTok.
Okay.
You said you were cutting your son's hair, and then he said, "Mom, if you don't get help, I'm leaving." And he left.
Yeah, you left.
Everyone wants to know, did you finish the haircut?
Did I finish the haircut? Yes, I did. I finished the haircut, yes.
You finished the haircut.
I did, yeah.
Perfect. Then he left after looking good. Then he says, "Peace out."
Yeah, then he said, yeah, see you later. Yeah.
I am amazed by the response of your last video. People have opened up about the discussion of trauma and addiction. And people have shared their own personal stories about addiction and family walls. Because that's one of the biggest things you highlighted in the last video.
Yeah.
If you have an advice to someone, before we go into our next interview, if you have an advice right now to a family member of someone who's going through addiction, what's your advice?
Honestly, I think that question is better asked of my kids because I had one child who, stood by me through thick and thin, right? My daughter never ever closed her door to me, always answered my calls, would track me down to feed me when I was homeless, would track me down to give me clean socks, and then the other one was just, no, get out. And I've been asked that question before, which one was the one that made you get sober? And to be honest, I think without both of them, I don't think I would have gotten sober. Both actions. And I think really for my daughter, she was desperate to not lose me. And my son was desperate to survive. Each individual has their own response to what happens, right?
Absolutely.
And his response was that in order to save himself, he needed to get away. And I mean, at the time, it broke my heart. I cried every day that he was gone. But I'm so grateful that he had the courage to do that. I'm so grateful that he was able to walk away when he needed to walk away. And he became the man that he is now as a result of that.
As I was thinking as well, just touching on the last interview too, you spoke about a young man who was in the shack you were in, and you were contemplating suicide at that exact moment. How likely are these 15-year-olds in these situations? And how could a parent support a child like that?
For the grace of God, I haven't had to experience that yet. Thankfully, all my kids are on the err on the side of caution. They don't ever do that kind of stuff, and I thank God for that every day. When I saw that teenager, in that shack, I knew it was just a matter of time before he stopped just smoking weed. And my advice to parents is, love them unconditionally, but have boundaries like mad. Don't let them into your house if they steal from you. Don't give them money. They're not going to use the money for what you intend it for. I still know people that are still loaded now, and every once in a while they'll come by, where I work, or meet me somewhere, and I will always, do you need a new pair of shoes? I'll buy you a new pair of shoes. Are you hungry? Let me buy you a meal. Do you need cigarettes? I'll buy you a package of cigarettes, but I will never give them money.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
Because I don't want that guilt of what if that's the $20 that was laced with something and they overdose and there's no one there to Narcan them, right?
No, absolutely. And the most important part of your story that I found to be the most important is the story of your trauma. I want to lead to that first by asking, were your parents ever in addiction?
We touched on that in the last video. My dad was an alcoholic, but I don't have memory of him drinking. But he didn't get recovery. He just stopped drinking. So there was still that restless, irritable, discontented man in our house that was just, my mom. I remember my mom telling us that we weren't allowed to get up to get ready for school until he was gone to work because we would upset him. And when he got home from work, we would be doing the dishes or whatever, and he'd be trying to take a nap on the couch, and he'd be so mad because we were making too much noise and that kind of stuff. So he still had the isms. When I look back now, I see that. But at the time, I had no real clue about that stuff.
What kind of work did he do?
He was in construction until I was about 7. And he was working out of town and lost his driver's license to a DUI. And that was what made him actually quit drinking. He came home from that with no job and no car and no driver's license. And my mom had gone away for a weekend away, and I got hit by a car at 7 years old, and he couldn't come to the hospital with me. And so I was in emergency for a number of hours waiting for someone to come. And I remember the nurses talking about possibly calling social services because my dad wasn't there yet to sign off on medical treatment. And he got sober then.
Wow.
Yeah. Then he worked from home and was he was a mechanic. He was a mechanic for years and years.
Okay. Your mom was not in addiction?
No, my mom was not.
I want to now lead into your uncle. He was your uncle, right?
No, he's just a family friend.
A family friend.
Just a family friend.
If you can just tell me a bit about him. Is he a family friend through dad's side or mom's side?
Through my dad's side, but yeah, there's just a lot of history there.
A lot of history.
He was friends with my dad on a construction site. He became friends with our whole family. My parents never locked their door. I know we lived in Surrey, but they never locked the door, and he never ever knocked. Just came in and hung out. They always spent time together. My dad would build race cars when I was young, and he was the driver of the car. So we spent tons of time with him. Yeah.
Okay. Can we call your family friend John?
Sure.
Okay. So John has been part of the family now for a while. He's hanging out, right? At what point does John become comfortable to approach you in a sexual manner?
Somewhere between 9 and 11, there were some definite moments that I remember that he crossed the line. Some unwanted touching, some unwanted advances that I didn't really understand. They didn't make sense to me. I was really sheltered as a kid. I don't even really remember seeing my parents ever kiss, so I had no idea about that kind of stuff. I was probably 11 or 12 when the first time that he ever raped me. I was about 11 or 12, and I was so shocked by it. I was so terrified that I just shut down. I was at his house. We were having a big sleepover. He had lots of kids, and we were having a sleepover. My brother and I were there, and he had kids our age too, so it was this big sleepover. And it was the middle of the night. I'll never forget. I was watching, well, I wasn't watching TV. There was a movie playing. This movie was called The Little Girl That Lived Down the Lane with Jodie Foster. And after it was all done, and I was laying on the couch, and I was terrified to move. I was terrified to breathe. I didn't know what to do. I remember seeing this scene. So Jodie Foster's there, and this social worker guy in a cape shows up and, where's your parents? And I guess her parents had died, and she didn't want to be taken away. And so he wanted to find out where her parents were. So he grabbed her hamster, and I think he burnt it with his cigar and then threw it in the fireplace. And that just was embedded in my mind as like, that's something that's going to happen to me if I ever talk about this, if I ever say anything to this. But there was that little part of me that I wanted to get help. So I told my mom, and my mom said she would take care of it. She kind of, buried it under the rug. We got into an argument. There was a fight. She hit me. And in my mind, I was so young. Like, I remember when my dad got home from work, if we had been bad, my mom would be like, oh, wait till your father gets home. And my dad was the one who gave out, spankings with the belt, because back then it was still okay to spank your kids. So when my mom lost her cool and panicked and hit me, I remember thinking, like, if my dad finds out, he'll probably kill me. So I just decided then that it was going to be a secret. And I honestly didn't realize that it was going to become a pattern of abuse that lasted years and years and years.
From 12 years old?
Yeah, from 11 or 12 until I was about 15. At least once a week, twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. I would be walking to school. He'd pull up in his car, make me get in. And it was actually a high school teacher that saw me get into that car, and he knew that things were going wrong for me. We touched on it briefly in the last video. I was having seizures at school. I had a seizure at home that scared the heck out of my whole family, so we were back and forth to Children's Hospital trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I don't know if my mom put it all together then, but I think there was a moment for me with the EEG, that's all these wires are crazy glued to my head, and I remember thinking, I wonder if it's that's causing this. By then I had already developed a really terrible eating disorder. To have some control over my life, it was one thing that nobody could force me to do. They couldn't force me to eat. And so I just wouldn't eat. And that probably played a part in the seizures as well, but it was manifesting itself as like a terrible physical illness, as well as, the mental and emotional stress of all of that, and never, ever feeling safe walking to school, never feeling safe walking home from school, never feeling safe going to a friend's house, bringing friends with me when I was going to see him. I would bring a friend with me thinking that would make me safe, and then feeling terrified, like, what if this happens to my friend? So then not being willing to take anybody with me for that safety, being willing to just do those visits on my own to protect other people, all of this adult responsibility and all this adult stuff put on this child, really.
So he had so much control over you, to a point that you would go there by yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And his kids know nothing about it.
Well, it's not a funny story, but when I finally got help and the police got involved, when I pressed charges, 17 other women between the ages of 13 and 25 came forward and said me too. There were multiple children of his own that came forward and said me too. I only know of one daughter of his that it didn't happen to, and we were in contact a few years ago, more than a decade now. I keep forgetting that I've been sober for a long time, but she reached out to me and said, hey, I just need to know if you're okay. And she told me that nothing had ever happened to her, and she felt such guilt, survivor guilt, right? Nothing ever happened to her, and now that I'm able to look back on it, I kind of knew that it was happening to some of the other kids that were around at the time, but I was a kid too, and I didn't know how to fix it for anybody. I couldn't fix it for me either.
I want to confirm that you told your mom around the first time it happened.
Yes.
Because it wasn't taken care of then you lost the power to do anything.
Absolutely.
Right. I know you told me you told your grandparents and you told, did you tell your dad?
Did I?
Tell your dad.
I never told my dad.
Okay.
Never, ever. I told, aunts and uncles and grandparents. And my mom my mom really tried to keep everything, under wraps, like, let's keep this quiet, let's keep this all hush hush, let's, let's not rock the boat, right? She was, now that I'm an adult and I can look back on what was happening, her whole life was at stake in those moments. Because if I came forward and I said what I said, and people got involved and other, agencies got involved, and what ended up happening when I was just about 16, the RCMP got involved, and it finally went to court. And when it was in court, they asked my mom, did your relationship with John ever change through the course of this time that you've known him? And she had to answer yes. And it was probably one of the hardest things I had ever heard from her, and hard for my dad to hear. But she'd been having an affair with him for most of her marriage to my dad. And her entire world would have exploded if what was happening to me came to light. And unfortunately for my mom, she just didn't have the tools to deal with that kind of stuff. She didn't have the capacity to figure out the next step. And sometimes, as people who are traumatized themselves, my dad wasn't the greatest guy when we were young. She lived with an alcoholic husband for years, and her own trauma kept her trapped and unable to help even her own children. Yeah, that's part of the story that
That's tough.
Yes, that we don't talk about a lot. My parents are still together to this day. They stayed together through all of that, but it wasn't easy for them. My dad made the decision to stay because he was concerned that when it all went to court, I would look like I came from a broken home and that somehow deserved something like that, because that's sort of the mindset that they grew up with. In the early 60s, they were young and teenagers, and that's what the mindset was back then. Sexual abuse happened, but it wasn't talked about. And now in the 80s, it happens and we talk about it, but how do we process that as human beings? And they're not equipped to get help. They're not equipped to get therapies. They're not taught that as children. They're just not. They're taught to just stuff it down and soldier forward. And so that's what they did.
I understand mom had to protect herself,
Yeah.
and do her best to hope this doesn't continue with you.
And of course, he assured her.
Right.
He assured her that he would never cross that line again. Of course he did. And at that point, I just kept it to myself. So not only was his secret safe, she thought that I was okay. She thought that she had handled it. And unfortunately, that whole everybody's keeping a secret ended up with, disastrous results in the end, right?
I only ask that because it's important as well. It's easy to blame your mom right now. Then we look in hindsight, then we realize the other factors that are preventing her from speaking out or helping you. And I think those are the factors that are very crucial, because then you can not blame mom, but then understand why she couldn't. And then maybe as a society at large, we learn more than anything else.
It's the generational abuse, right? It's that whole idea that, you know, these things have happened to me and they happen to me and to me. And, you know, I cannot in good conscience look back and blame my mom for any of that, because she did the absolute best that she could with the skills that she had. Maybe other people can look back and judge her for that. But at some point, because we're talking about trauma leading to addiction, right? At some point, I have to take responsibility for that trauma. And I have to say my part in that is that I never got healing for the trauma. I didn't heal from that trauma, and I carried it with me well into my life and into my early 40s. And that was when I realized that if I don't heal from this trauma, I'm never going to get well.
Another part of this discussion that I find important to focus on is this trauma manifesting to physical illness.
Yes.
All right. I understand then you have an eating disorder, anxiety issues were coming up. Just walk through the importance of, had this been dealt earlier, this could have been prevented.
So when a trauma is experienced, your brain reacts in a certain way. And I was in my 20s when I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I didn't believe it. I'd been diagnosed with all sorts of stuff to try and fix me. Oh, maybe you have depression, here, take this pill. You have anxiety, take this pill. You have this, take this pill. And I would try these medications, and they just didn't work for me. And I'm part of that 5% of people that when they take antidepressants, they have the opposite effect on me. And the only suicide attempts that I've ever actually made have been when I've been on antidepressants. I'm the 5%. But that being diagnosed with all of these things, and I just kept saying, no, that's not what it is. No, that's not what it is. And when I sat down with a counselor, a psychiatrist, and he walked me through what PTSD means. It's not just Vietnam vets coming back and having flashbacks and screaming about being in a war-torn country. It's the same trauma response that guy had in the war-torn country that I had in my abuse. As we talked about this earlier, as a friend of my kids, he got a B on a paper that he had written and completely came unglued. That was a huge trauma for him. And he still, has that same trauma response that I have, that Vietnam vet has. So when we try and quantify what trauma looks like, we're doing a disservice to the kid who got the B, because there's some sort of stigma around, well, your trauma wasn't as bad as mine. But physiologically, it's identical. But he also gets the added shame of people telling him that his trauma doesn't qualify for trauma counseling, when it does. Somebody who has been abused physically or mentally or emotionally doesn't make it any less or more than somebody who has been abused in physical ways.
As we are talking about trauma leading to physical and medical illnesses, to get rid of those illnesses that you are now going through, including anxiety,
Right.
what kind of support did you receive? And is this around 16 or 17?
Around 16.
Yeah, what kind
15,
of support
16.
did you receive?
My parents signed me up for some group counseling with other girls that had been abused, thinking that would help me to feel not so alone, not so isolated. But it really was a very odd, it's like when you take somebody who has an eating disorder and you hospitalize them with other people that have eating disorders. Often you pick up new and in more inventive ways to harm yourself. And in that particular group, there was a lot of things that were happening that I had never heard of self-harm until I was in that group. I'd never heard of that. Although you could argue that eating disorder is a part of self-harm, but this was a young woman who cut herself. I'd never heard of that before, and it was shocking to me. I got pregnant shortly after that, moved out on my own, and it was actually victim services through the courts that offered me counseling one-on-one, and I met an amazing psychologist who I saw for years, once a week for years and years and years, and he always encouraged me to just be the smart, brave woman that I could be. And I had moments of that. He encouraged me when I said, I'm going to move and I'm going to start all over again and I'm going to go to school. And he said, do it. Do it. You can do this. Like, you can do anything that you can set your mind to. And I saw him again in the 90s, actually, in the very late 90s, right before I had my youngest son. I saw him again for a few sessions, and he, one of his first questions was like, you don't believe in medication for your own mental illness. Why did you take the pills? And I said, because at that point I was desperate to feel better.
Pills for?
Depression and anxiety. Right. And like, why would you take that stuff? And I said, because I was so desperate to feel better.
Walk me through watching someone cutting and you trying to ask yourself, does this work?
Oh, I definitely, I remember watching that and seeing that and thinking to myself that I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me until years later, seeing my own daughter take her hand and put it on an iron and then pull her hand away, and all her little fingertips, she was about 5, and all of her little fingertips were burnt. And I was just, like, why did you do that? And then I said to her, she wasn't crying at all, and she said, I looked at her and I said, that must have hurt. And that was when she started to cry, and it just clicked. The way that some people get emotional and mental pain to the outside of their body is to have a physical outlet for it. And it made sense to me. But at the time, at 16 years old, I just could not.
Wow.
I couldn't fathom why people would do that. It still didn't make sense to me. Despite what I had been through, I was still fairly naive at 16 years old, still, even though I was having a baby and all of that, but still fairly naive about certain aspects of life and the world, right?
Did you start cutting yourself?
I did not.
You did not?
No, it was too terrifying to me. I couldn't imagine. It scared me so much, and I thought, no, I don't want to hurt myself.
So you end up getting this, you go into a group therapy and you're seeing these things and you're like, wow, what is going on, right?
Yeah.
And you said you saw a psychologist who appears to have been helping. Correct me, is he helping?
He was an amazing influence, just really empowered me to be who I was, really empowered me to be, like brave and strong and resilient and all these things, and smart. He used to tell me all the time, you're incredibly intelligent, don't sell yourself short, go to school, go back to school, do the things that you need to do to feel better in your own skin, He truly believed in me, and whether he was paid to do it or not, he believed in me and really helped me a lot. I saw him again years later, probably 20 years later, and he was surprised that I had even tried antidepressants. He said, you don't believe in pills for yourself and mental illness, and why did you do that? And I said, I just wanted to feel better, and I thought, maybe this was the answer.
But the antidepressants did not help.
The antidepressants did not help. I'm one of the 5% of people that they caused me to instantly become suicidal.
My question to you now is, I'm hearing a lot about psychologists and their role, but it's not very prevalent in SARI or in our current health system.
It's not. I was I was assigned him through victim services through the courts, and he was downtown. I rode the SkyTrain and the bus all the way downtown once a week to see him.
Were assigned to the victim court services. The last person we had here, he said he was also assigned through the courts. I'm wondering if you know, you probably don't know, is there a reason why there are just not more psychologists who, when you go for your mental health evaluation, there's an option of a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
I have my own opinion on that.
Let's hear it.
It's easier to, give people a pill to feel better than it is to, and not just easier for the psychiatrist. And I'm not saying that.
hear you.
It's also easier for that person who's experienced the trauma, because digging up that trauma in a 50-minute session is not easy. So you have to unpack, deal with some stuff, and then repack it. So when you send that person back out into the world, they're not reeling and still thinking about all of the terrible things that are brought up during that 50-minute session that you get with a psychologist. Can be some deep and re-traumatizing stuff if it's not dealt with properly with proper trauma counselors. I think that's probably part of the reason why.
But you would like to see more psychologists within our mental health system?
I think I would like to see a lot more looking at trauma as a cause of addiction, as one of the causes of addiction. For sure, there's always that predisposition to addiction based on genetics. There's an argument for that, how you grew up, so the nature versus nurture, and trauma, and there's so many things that lead us down that path. The most prevalent being there's something inside of us that doesn't belong. Some feeling, I felt like I was not good enough for the whole world. I wasn't good enough for my family. I wasn't good enough for the people around me. And I carried that around with me for so long, and decided at some point unconsciously that I needed to destroy that, and I didn't know how. And so drinking and using substance became the way to destroy that thing inside me that didn't belong.
I want to know, getting your relationship straight with your mom, how was that like? It is easy to blame, and we spoke about it.
Yeah.
It is easy to shift that. But you went through what you went through. But your mom, according to you in that moment as you saw it, she didn't help. So how did you finally heal, and how did you rebuild that relationship with mother-daughter relationship?
For so many years, I would punish her in ways that were just awful. We would spend time together. She wanted to spend time with her grandbabies, and I would go over there and, have this expectation that she would buy me something. Or we would go shopping, and I would look at something, and she would offer to buy it for me, and I would think, yeah, you should buy me things. It was childish. My own early 20s were a bit of a gong show. And it wasn't until that psychologist, years and years later, I was pregnant with my youngest. I was 28 years old, and we were talking about my relationship with my mom, and he said to me, the only way that you're ever going to heal from that is if you finally stop putting this expectation on her that she's going to be this mom that you have in your mind that moms are supposed to be like. Think about it like this. When you're old and your kids are grown-ups, do you hope that they would judge you and base your decisions that you've made? At this point, I'm not an addict. Base the decisions that you've made in your life. Would you hope that they would judge you by the skill set that you have? And if she could have made a better decision, don't you believe that she would have? And looking back on that conversation with that psychologist, looking back on my own addiction and all of those things, yeah, if I could have made better decisions, I would have. But I was unable to make better decisions. And so she also was unable to make better decisions. And as soon as I reached that point and I stopped holding her up to this standard that I thought she needed to be, and just started to love and accept her for exactly who she is, all of her flaws and all of my flaws, as just two flawed human beings just trying to make our way through life, it became easy to look at her and just love her. She struggled with it at first because it felt so foreign to her that I was trying to be better in the relationship with her. And I still joke around with her about how, like I've gotten well and I'm dragging her kicking and screaming through this recovery process with me, and mending our relationship, whether she wants to or not. And she still laughs, and we still sometimes resort to our old way of communicating, which is unhealthy. But we recognize it now. There's a lot more I saying I love you back and forth between us now. And just recently I was put into isolation. I tested negative for COVID, but they made me go into isolation anyways. And, every day she would bring me a little care basket of food and things that I would need for the day. And when I came out of isolation, the first time I was able to see her and have dinner with her, and I was in isolation through Mother's Day, she wrapped her arms around me and was just like, "Oh, it's so great to see you."
Wow.
And that's really not my mom. Like, she's not a hugger, but there she was, and her, just hugging me, and I held her for a moment. It was kind of it shows a lot of progress for both of us.
Right.
It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it.
So you are saying to accept each other as we are, than holding any expectations, then you can heal.
For sure. One of the things that they say in recovery is expectations are premeditated resentments.
Wow.
So when I have this expectation of someone else, that's on me. That's not on that person. They have no idea what my expectation of them is. And when they fail to meet my expectation, who is to blame for that but me? And that just builds more resentment. And one of the things that they say in recovery too is that resentments are the number one offender for us, because we feel resentful that this person didn't do A, B, or C. And then we start to build a case against them. Like, oh, they didn't do this or they didn't do that and they should have, and this. And the next thing you know, I'm wrapped up in what they're doing and feeling angry and bitter and maybe jealous, envious, who knows. But it leads you to that path of, I don't want to feel this, and I only know one way to feel better. So my default setting is to drink or to use drugs to feel better. That is my default setting. And it takes conscious effort to not feel like that, and to choose a different option than that default setting.
So now we are going to move on to rebuilding relationships with your children. You were able to rebuild your relationship with your mom.
Yes.
And it sounds like it's been a long journey. Not easy, but when both parties are willing, it's absolutely possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's one thing I have to say I truly admire, because it shows you valuing a relationship with a family than just saying, I hate you and I'm moving on.
Right.
Because it's possible for you to do well without her,
Absolutely, yeah.
but it's also better to do well with her.
With her, yeah.
All right. I'm wondering now, in your road to wellness, how do you rebuild your relationship with your children? Because I'm sure, even though your daughter was very supportive, it might still have been difficult for you to face her, though grateful for her support.
She never wavered. Right from from day one, I started on this recovery path. She walked with me every step of the way. She's been at every celebration of my recovery,
Wow.
from my 30, 60, 90 days all the way to, she shared at my 9-year cake a few months ago, 6 months ago. You know, she has never wavered. She bought me my very first recovery book. She has been a huge source of support. That son that walked away had gone to Narcotics Anonymous for families and friends, like Al-Anon is for alcoholics, Nar-Anon is for families and friends of addicts. And so he'd gone there and, you know, tried to find a way to be at peace in his own heart with his decisions and with our relationship and what that looked like. And he sort of heard there that, you know, until an addict is 5 years sober, they really can't be trusted to stay the sobriety path. And so he had made up his mind that he would be that I would be 5 years sober before he would talk to me. And I was living in this recovery house, and my dad called and he said, Brad wants to come and see you. And I thought, so excited, and I thought, oh, this is it. I was so stoked, and they pulled in, and I went out to the car, and I got into the back seat of the car. My son had his cell phone, and he Googled the address of the recovery house, and it came up as being a recovery society. And he said, well, at least she's not lying this time. We can go. He never said a word to me. And it broke my heart. And then I went back inside and I cried, and it was, you know, awful, but I kept going. I kept, you know, working through my own stuff and healing through different things and dealing with my past trauma, and just, you know, about once a month I would ask my dad, you know, could you please reach out to him for me and ask him if he'll have coffee with me? And the answer was always no. It was always no. And, you know, you could argue that I should probably have stopped asking him because it hurt me so much. But I always wanted him to know that I was willing, no matter what, to do what it took to rebuild that relationship. And through the process of the recovery journey I'm on, I do 12-step fellowship, and one of the steps is to make amends to other people, and not to clear my own conscience of guilt, but to allow that other person to feel free to talk about what happened for them, and for me to acknowledge that for them, how hard it was or how awful it was or whatever comes up for them. And so I would ask, and I'd ask, and I'd ask, and he would always say no. And I had moved out of the recovery house and in with my mom and my dad and my youngest son. My dad had injured himself and needed some additional care at the time, and my mom was working full-time. And I was thrilled that I was trusted enough to move into their house. That was kind of fun. And so I moved there, and I'll never forget, there was a knock on the door, and I opened it, and there's my son. And he said, I don't know what these amends are that you want to give me, but if you want to give them to me, I'll take them right now. I was 18 months sober. And so we sat down and we had a conversation about, you know, the things. And I didn't say that I was sorry, because I'd said I was sorry so many times to so many people. Me saying I'm sorry it meant nothing.
Right.
But what I did say was that I regretted. Like, I regret so much, you know, leaving him responsible for his youngest brother to get him to school, because I was not there because I was out scoring drugs, or I was passed out somewhere upstairs and couldn't get up and take him to school. So, you know, he at 14 years old would steal my car and drive himself and his little brother to school and drive them home again. You know, like he had to do so much. He picked up so much slack for us, you know, for our family. When the two big kids were small, we used to have something that we called the we. And it was like our collective agreement on, you know, where we were going to go, where we were going to eat dinner, where we were going to go and spend time outside, what we were going to do. We were a we. And that was so far gone at that moment. Like, there was no we. As a result of my decisions, my poor choices, when he said he didn't want to talk to me ever again, he also said to his sister, either you walk away from Mom or I'm walking away from you too. And I watched my addiction destroy their relationship as well. And it has taken them years to rebuild it. And just recently, within the last probably year, they've started talking about the we again, and it's kind of fun to see the rebuilding of the we. But when I made that amends to him, I brought up a handful of things that I had done that I regretted, and and I said to him, I asked him, I'm like, well, do you have anything that you want to add, something that I missed, something that you need me to acknowledge for you? And he said, I didn't think I was allowed to say anything. And I said, of course you are. This is about you, not me. And he had a little list. He had a little laundry list of things that I had done that hurt him. One of them being was that he had to steal my car to drive his brother. And I had no idea that he'd done that. And I was just like, wow, like I regret that happened. And, he had a few other things that I remember, took my breath away, that he had been through. When he first got his driver's license, we were fighting so much. I signed for him to get his L, and he was, like, that's it, I don't want you in my life. He graduated high school early. He left when he was 16. And so then, I was so angry, and there was so much going back and forth, and I said, well, I'm going to take away the fact that I signed for your license, and I'm going to do this and that. And so he was doing research, trying to figure out if I could actually do that, and on and on it went. It was just so awful, the things that I did trying to hang on to him. And now he comes to visit. We're actually getting together for coffee on Tuesday to just hang out, and just be together. It's not the same. It will never be the same. But it's better in a way, where we talk to each other and we deal with each other on a level now that's different. My daughter, because she didn't feel free to, she was terrified that I was going to get loaded, but didn't want to ever say that. So she, in the very early stages of my recovery, held her tongue, never said a word about anything. No, I'm good, everything's good. And started, having these weird responses to me when I was around 5 years sober. There was lots of anger directed towards me. And so I sat down with her and I said, if you ever want to revisit that amends, like we can. And we did. We revisited the amends, and she felt much more comfortable telling me that I had done this to her and that to her and this to her. And I, accepted all of those things, acknowledged all of those things for her. It's a process, right? And we get through it, one step at a time.
Wow. Wow. And I think it's amazing to know that you understand it may never be the same again, but you are all taking steps necessary to get it as close as possible to where it used to be or to where it should be. And it sounds like everyone is taking that step, right, to say, fine, let me hear those amends.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's not where we should be. I think it's where we could be.
Where you could be.
Because, should doesn't exist for me. Because I should have done lots of things. And I didn't. I can't live in the should haves or the what ifs. I have to be right here, right now, and making the best of what I have right here, right now, with my relationships with them, and building it to what it could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What a journey. It is my understanding your children are working with individuals that are in addiction.
Yes. My oldest daughter works with people who have mental health and addiction issues. My youngest works for the same organization, people with mental health and addiction issues. And my son, my middle son, the one that walked out, he decided that he wanted to be the person he needed when he was younger. And he became a youth care worker and is now working with youth, and he's a coordinator of youth care workers now, and does home visits and helps people to deal with, and these kids are all the highest risk youth. Most of them have addiction issues themselves. Pretty proud of all three of them.
It's an interesting journey, right? Where it takes you, and in a way, everyone is making the best of the worst situation, because now you're realizing that this middle son also realizes that people like this need support as well. Had he never been through it himself, he wouldn't quite understand that.
Absolutely.
Right? So his life could have been better, but that's one life. Instead, now he's helping 10, 20 lives.
Exactly. It's
Right?
like the ripple in the pond. When you throw your rock in, you never
Yeah.
know where that ripple is going to touch, right?
I don't want to keep you too long. I will cut it short a little bit, but mostly because I do know there are possible conversations coming up on this show again,
Yes,
on a broader spectrum.
absolutely.
I'm hoping that we can make that happen with
Yeah, me too.
each part involved willing.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited.
So I won't disclose too much. I just hope that that time comes, and I cannot wait, because not only do you have a story to tell, you have information to give, you have lessons to teach, and learning about addiction and mental health is the most important thing of why we do what we are doing. So thank you for contributing to that learning. And
Thank you for having me again.
I'm excited to have you. I can't wait to see you again. It's going to be a never-ending learning, it sounds like. And that's what life should be.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful for you. And thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Jason, good to see you.
You too.
Beautiful. Hey everyone, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I do really appreciate it. If you can, please subscribe to our channel for more content. If you can, please join our Patreon team. The link is down below. And also you can join our GoFundMe. The link is also involved below. This will help us to bring awareness of addiction as well as destigmatize this illness. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we'll create more content for you. Thank you so much.